Hi, you guys. My name is Joelle Agria. I'm out in California, Northern California to be exact. I have a small bakery out here called Home Baker, actually, called Happy Macs Pastries and More. I specialize in macarons, Asian-inspired infused desserts, and croissants. Today, we're mainly going to cover macarons. It is one of those cookies that is not, in theory, it seems simple. I like to refer to them to the French version of Oreos because in theory, it's a sandwich cookie, right? The big thing with macarons that it is, you need to be precise in your weighing. You're not able to use like cups. You have to have like a scale like this, just because you have to measure out your ingredients. Another thing with macarons, because you are making a meringue, you're gonna have to age your eggs. So normally, what I do, I'll add age egg whites, and you can see right here, it's about 2 days old, and I just leave it in the fridge for 2 days. Or else, I kind of hoard my egg whites every time I just need egg yolks. I'll keep sticking them into the freezer in little containers like this, or like anything like that, just because it's one of those things that it freezes beautifully. You could defrost it and it'll work great when you need it. Egg yolks, not so much, but egg whites freeze great. For macarons, there is only 4 ingredients, at least for the show. You have aged egg whites, sugar. Now, and this might be a little hard to find, I have extra fine sugar or baker's sugar. Actually, let me see if I have a box. I might have a box. I'm gonna show you guys. It's also called castor sugar. So it's pretty much like this. And this is what I found at my local grocery over here. And I found it in multiple places. The reason I like it is because it dissolves into the meringue, into the egg whites much easier than granulated. You can use granulated sugar. The only thing is it takes a little longer to get that nice meringue. And then powdered sugar and almond flour. Those are the 2 things that you generally will need. So when I do this in person, I teach this to the people in my little town. I make them use the hand mixer. The reason I do is because you have a better feel of the meringue when you're making it. It does take longer, and your arm starts going, sometimes it'll go numb. No, I'm kidding. It is a longer process though, because you're using your hand mixer. Feel free to use your stand mixer. I have actually, normally I use my smaller one actually, instead of my bigger one, mainly because of surface area. The more surface area in the bowl here, it's a little harder to get a good meringue, versus depending on the volume you're using. I'm using such a small volume, which is like 50 grams of egg whites. There's hardly any in the bottom. If I use a bigger one, it's gonna take longer for that meringue to fluff up. Another thing is also with the meringue, most people know meringues where you pour the sugar in, egg whites, put it at the highest power, and you just try to get as much volume as possible. That's not the case for this. These, you need to have a really stable meringue. To do this, you're gonna take it slow. When I mean slow, I'm gonna be whipping up the egg whites probably for a good 5 to 10 minutes. So, and I add the sugar. I do not add the sugar all at once. I add it in 3 parts, just because it's building that strength of that meringue. So, and you start low. And then once you're starting low, what you're wanting to do is, you don't add the sugar yet. What you're gonna do is add it once you get the little bubbles, because it's strengthening those egg white proteins. And I'm impatient, so I had this need to go, faster, but I know like I can't, because what's gonna happen is that it's gonna break. the meringue. So,
I have a quick question. Do you not use any cream tartar in your egg whites?
You can. I generally don't, mainly because I never have it in the house.
Okay.
So like, but you can. If you do it, I would say do a teaspoon.
Okay.
I know my mom, who first taught me how to make meringues, she looked at me and was like, why aren't you using cream of tartar? I just never have it in the house because that's the only application I would use it in.
Yeah. See, I use it in my royal icing and my marshmallows. And
and then I always forget to. Yeah, and the problem is I always forget to buy it. And then so when I'm wanting to make macarons, which is funny because I make it quite often, like on a weekly basis, I just forget to get in the store to grab it. You can't use that.
I would suggest for people just starting out because it helps a little with your egg whites.
It stabilizes it.
Yeah, exactly.
So you're looking at, and hopefully you guys can see it, it's a little bubbly, and that's when you add a third of your sugar. And if you have granulated sugar and you can't find the extra fine, what you can do is put it through the food processor just a little bit, just to get it finer. You don't have to get the specialized sugar, really. It's just I use so much sugar in my house that the process of going through the food processor each and every time, I'm way too lazy for that.
And just an FYI for anybody who loves Costco like I do, I get my extra fine sugar at Costco.
They don't have it at mine.
They have it. I don't know where it's at, but here in San Antonio, they actually have an organic extra fine sugar that is really priced. And
if I could do that, I would. I'm constantly having to buy the box because they don't have it here. At least not in my case. So when I add the second set of sugar, I increase the speed to 1. Do not go any further, just because what you're wanting to do. Again, you're building that great protein, the egg white protein. And I would suggest to kind of stir it around. I've seen people just kind of leave it on the bottom. It's not gonna fluff up as quickly. What it's gonna do is it's gonna take so much longer to get to that point. So if you can see here, hold on, let me actually tilt the computer. It's probably easier.
Joy, hold on, you're muted. Let me see if I can unmute you.
I think you accidentally muted yourself when
here. Did you get it? Okay. That's probably when I tilted it. When it gets all foamy, it's quick, actually. It's a quick process. It's just getting to that point where you're getting it a really good meringue. This is why I like the hand mixer, even though it takes longer, just because I can feel it. I know I could kind of limit, like, oh, you know what, I'm not getting a part of the eggs. Let me get it as much as I can. Moving the mixer around. Okay.
I got it.
And this is actually, there's multiple versions of macarons. You have the French version. That's where you are adding the sugar directly to the egg whites. You have the Swiss version where you're putting the egg whites on a double boiler and mixing it like this. I'm sorry, Italian version's that one. Where it's kind of like the Italian meringue, where you're buttercream, where you're doing it on the stove. It's the same purpose. Another one is the Swiss, where you are using a pot and making a simple syrup and pouring it directly with egg whites. I've done all three. I don't like the Italian version because it's always hard for me to get a mixer to my stove close enough. And I'm always scared that I'm gonna burn myself really with the bowl because the bowl's hot at that point. I learned the first time I learned this was through the Swiss method. But I found, at least for myself, it's a little more unstable when I moved to California. So I'm originally from Chicago, and my recipe from Chicago to California to my various houses that I live here has changed drastically. I started with a Swiss version, pouring the simple syrup to the egg white and whipping it, right? Then I've changed to this method where I'm adding the sugar straight. And even that, the numbers of the amount has changed drastically. Because macarons depends on, which is crazy, humidity and elevation. Is it going to rise? Is it going to be hollow? Is it going to be wrinkly? You know, those things is a factor that you're troubleshooting all the time. I'm trying not to shake the table. So as you can see, and I might just think, you could see it's really frothy. And I'm actually gonna switch to my big mixer just because I could talk to you guys more. It makes it easier. But I don't like using my big mixer for this. I only like using the smaller version of the KitchenAid. Just because, again, it has it where you're able to kind of, there's more surface area. So from there, I'm also then using almond flour and confectioner sugar. I would strongly suggest to run it through a food processor first, just to make sure it's fine enough.
So I have a question about that too. Sorry, I have all the questions always. When you run it through your food processor, can you do bigger batches of it and then store it?
You can.
Or is it something you have to do on the spot?
No, I do it all the time.
Okay.
And that's the only reason I'm running it through the food processor first, because it was frozen when I pulled it out, when I pulled my almond flour out. So it's super chunky. And so I wanted to make sure it's loose enough where I could put it through a sieve. And it's just a few. Now, when you're first learning macarons, I would suggest not to flavor the shell yet. So once you get learning, because really macarons is mainly just practice. A whole lot of practice. What I have done is that in here, I've added freeze-dried fruit. I've added green tea. I've added, what else have I added? Cocoa powder to flavor the shell itself.
And do you flavor all your shells like in general, or do you mostly find that you're doing like your regular like vanilla or regular unflavored shell with different?
I do depending what the flavor is. I'll do it for chocolate. I'll do it for green tea. I won't do it for, like, for example, not all fruit, depending on what the flavoring is. If I am doing, like, I did a whole series of Girl Scout cookies once. All of those were, I use bits of the Girl Scout cookies into the shell itself, depending on what it is.
That sounds really yummy. I don't know if this question if it makes sense, but okay, you said a lot of practice. So let's say you make it once and it fails, and you make it again and it fails. Like, how do you know what to change when you're practicing?
That's a great question. So, and there's a few lists online where it kind of shows you what your troubleshooting is. So, for example, if your macarons burst, like it becomes a little crater, it's because your oven's too hot. If it is wrinkly, your oven is too cold. So it's playing with that temperature. And trust me, my first batch will differ from my last batch sometimes. Same oven, same batch, but it will vary. It's crazy. If there's no feet, sometimes your meringue's not strong enough. If there's hollows, meaning, so there may be a little gap between the bottom of the cookie to the top of the cookie when you cut it in half, meaning the shell. We call those hollows. That may be you didn't get enough air out, or you didn't mix the dry ingredients well enough into the meringue. What's another one? Lopsided. If it's lopsided, because there is a drying process, it may become like the meringues may rise, but it may be like crooked. That is when the meringue is stuck to the parchment paper or silicone mat and it dried too long. I'm trying to think what else is there. Browning, because when you add the color, there shouldn't be that much browning. Again, it's your oven is too hot. I'm trying to think. First, Michael. That's about most of them, and some of them you could fix. So, like for example, and when I mean fix, you could kind of hide the mistake. So, like for wrinkles, what I do, I dip the wrinkled side into chocolate, and I'll do like a decoration. If it bursts, and I thought this was cool. What somebody did was made a geode version of it. So at the burst part, they colored the edge of the crack and adds sugar, like the rock sugar. It looked cool. For ones that are just not rising, what I have done, I've actually crushed them up and used them in brownies or use them as a parfait. So you could easily reuse them. Cake pops. That is another way to do this. What else? So there's multiple, I mean, my friends just eat the shell without the filling, really, a lot of the times. So those are the things that you could do with that. Another thing with the shells, I do a nut-free macaroon, actually. You could do that by using pumpkin seeds. I use flaxseed flour, personally, just because it's more neutral in tasting. And what was pumpkin seeds? You use sesame seeds, but it doesn't work as well. I wouldn't advise using coconut flour just because it absorbs so much water that it won't have the same texture. You're gonna have to half the recipe by 4 of your coconut flour just because it takes so much liquid out, and you're gonna find it super, super stiff.
And just on that same note, something that I found, Christy, is that if you make some of these mistakes, like especially the over browning, because that's the thing that I kept doing at first, when you fill them and you let them sit overnight, some of that stuff gets a whole lot better. Like the over browning, kind of dry and crispy. You fill them, let them sit, and it softens up the shell. Sometimes it can help with the hollows, so you don't even really notice them. It'll help fill it like that. So
I do that all the time. Yeah. The only thing with the hollows or what I do, because you're supposed to let it sit for 24 to 48 hours, actually. So you can see that's pretty much my meringue. So like for this set, I'm making guava. I can't really flavor the shell with that because it's hard to find homemade like freeze-dried guava to use. 2, it's not going to add that much because guava is such a like a very light taste that you're not going to really notice it, especially the amount of sugar that's in here. So what I'm just going to do is dye it, and let me grab some dye.
So when you flavor the shell, do you always flavor with something that's powdered or freeze dried? I don't know if she can still hear me.
I do.
Okay, so it's not like you're going to put in like some kind of liquid or some kind of like boiled down fruit or anything like that, besides maybe like
no, but no, because it's going to affect the meringues. Right. The only one I will use, and just because I use it kind of as a food dye, is because I'm Filipino, my ube extract. But that's the only time, and I'm very careful about that because what may happen is that it might affect the meringue itself. And another thing, and I apologize because my daughter spilled on my food dye. I use AmeriColor. It has to be the gel. You cannot use like Wilton because it doesn't work out that way. I do have powder of coloring. It works wonderful. It's so expensive to get that I never could get, especially like all the colors. It's hard to find all the colors that you need. So I kind of stick to AmeriColor, and because I like it. It's so you're easily to find it. And of course. So I teach a lot of kid cooking classes, and they love my food dyes. So like trying to find the color you're needing is like a headache, because this is what has happened. I have concluded I'm just gonna dump it. I don't try to be organized. It went out the window.
Can you show us about how much you put in?
Yeah, it was about 1 tablespoon, 1 drop. You're not gonna want that much. So if you can see, it's very little.
Okay, and there was a question. What speed did you have it on with your KitchenAid?
I only go up to 6. I don't go any further. So when I'm doing with the KitchenAid itself, I start at 6, or I start at 1, and I slowly, gradually go up, but I never go up any past 6. Because again, I don't want to break that meringue. So if you could see, this is how the meringue is. It looks like more of a medium peak to not in the middle, medium and firm, versus a stiff peak meringue. It's just because like it's more like whipped creamy type, and you'll see why. And realize I don't have a sifter. Hold on 1 second. So, and I do this also. How I added the sugar in 3s, I do the same thing. I add the powdered sugar and the almond in 3s. Just because, again, I don't want to break up all that air that you just built up into the meringue as quickly. So, when you're mixing this, what you're going to do is, again, fold it in, but you're kind of knocking out the air too of your meringue.
Okay, more questions. So I've had some people recently say that they start the macaronage part in their mixer. They'll put like the paddle attachment or something on.
I've never been able to do that.
Okay, me neither.
Not well.
To know if that was something I was missing something on or what it is.
Some people do it, and they do it at, I don't think they're doing it at high speed. I think they're doing it at low.
Yeah.
2, I think they're only doing for 2 or 3 turns. So it's like 1, 2, 3, and that's it.
Well, then that kind of
I don't think they're doing that much.
And everything.
Mm-hmm. I'm just not that type. I like the feel of it.
Yep.
So like I'll start with my hand mix. So I start with my hand mixer and then go to the KitchenAid, just because I like that feel to know that how strong my meringue is.
I was just wondering if I was missing something on that, because every time I've tried it, it just hasn't worked out well. Even if I try it a little bit and then pull it off, it always seems overmixed or something has happened or whatever it is. It just never feels right.
Really large recipes, like industrial, it helps.
Oh yeah?
Maybe, yeah. And that's the thing.
That big.
Yeah, and I'm always I do small batches, just because I like, as a home baker, you never make that much macarons like in a row. And if you do, you're looking at different colors, different flavors. So like for me, it's not worth doing such a large batch at the same time. Like for this week, I'm making like 6 dozen, but reality check, each dozen is a different flavor. So I could, in theory, divide up my batches and, color each one, but I like flavoring the shell as much as I can.
Joy, Heather had to step away for a second. She's asking, did you process the almond flour or use it straight from the bag or box before sifting?
I just put it through the food processor just to make sure the clumps are kind of broken up. And it's mainly because I'm always pulling it from frozen. So it's all like stiff. But that's all I'm doing. So once you add in everything, what you're gonna wanna do is kind of get the air out. But not so aggressively, obviously, but enough where the meringue looks like lava. So when you drop it, and let me see if I can.
There was another message from Jen, how to flavor the shell, which we kind of just talked about. And we were talking about how it's best to use powdered flavors, freeze-dried things like that, because if you use an extract or something that's too liquidy, it'll affect
the meringue.
Meringue.
Exactly. I only use it for like one thing, and it's mainly because I'm flavoring ube, and I use such a small amount that it wouldn't affect it as much, because it would be the same amount as the food dye that I'm using. So
at what point in the process would you add the flavoring if you were going to?
I do it when I'm adding the powder. So when I'm adding the almond flour and the powdered sugar. So if you could see, when you push, it kind of goes back to its form. One test is the figure 8 test. So if you scoop some, and if you can make a figure 8, and it becomes one solid, like it melds back into each other, into the batter, it's good. I have a little more, there's a little more that I need to mix through to get to that texture. But it should be similar to lava. Is another question?
So just for me, I personally hate when people say it should be similar to lava, because I don't know what lava is supposed to be like.
Oh, I'm trying to think what's a better. I know, and it's so, you know what it is? It's so hard to describe.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to say slime either.
It's one of my big pet peeves though, because every recipe is like, it should be similar to flowing lava. And I'm like, what the hell does flowing lava look like? And I'm used to flowing lava.
No, I get it. I know, and it's hard to.
I like the figure test, because if I can do it without breaking it and it flows back in, like you were saying, then that seems to work for me.
Yeah, I do the figure 8 normally.
Yeah. But it's funny, because that's one of my pet peeves, is when people were like, oh, it should look like flowing lava. And I'm like, okay, tell me it should look like lava one more time.
I'm going to watch some YouTube videos.
It's such a hard way to describe what the heck, the view is for that. Just because, again, it's one of those things. It's like, it's not, I don't want to say like slime either, but it's similar to like slime.
Well, you don't ever want to compare your baking to slime or anything that's unappealing, because somebody else compared it to like a thick bowl of snot one time, and I was like, dude, that's gross. Like, so it's hard, but it's funny that you said that, because I was like, oh, I hate that. I hate it so much. But Christy, you definitely have to YouTube videos of flowing lava, because that's what I was doing when I was learning how to make them.
That's exactly what I'm going to do. Because I mean, I can picture it in my head, but I can't say I've like really studied it.
It's weird. Really what it is that you don't want it where it keeps its form.
Yeah.
You're getting enough of the egg meringue out where it's not going to keep its form.
Yeah, and it's just my 2 cents, obviously, but the whole idea is when you pipe it, you want it to stay in a circle and not be so flowy that they're going to all become one big thing. But you also, if you lift it up, don't want to get those peaks and those things like that stay. Exactly. You want it to be able to eventually have it just flow into itself, if that makes sense. But the figure 8 test is my go-to. If you can do the figure 8 and it's not breaking and it's flowing back into itself at some point and not, staying on top, then you're good to go.
And I use reusable pastry bags all the time, at least for this. And this is the only thing I use it for, actually. And I am
so environmentally friendly. I want to do that, but I just don't have the patience to clean them.
Well, that's why I don't use the cloth. I hate the cloth ones. And
Oh,
because they're thick, I
Yeah.
can't squeeze enough to, this one's a little thinner, and I cheat. I use templates because I cannot make a circle for the life of me.
so while you're piping those, I actually tried doing a slip mat like this. And for whatever reason, I couldn't get it to work. It works better for me on parchment paper. So
Yeah.
I printed out circles the size that I wanted, slid it
Mhm.
under the parchment paper, and that's how I pipe the circles. I don't
It's
freehand
funny
it.
because everybody's on a debate between parchment and silicone mat. I think because I learned off of silicone mat, I'm just used to them. You do have to adjust your heat. Keep that in mind. Because the silicone mat's thicker, right? And so your heat at a silicone mat is going to be a slightly higher than parchment. Just because the parchment is such a thin, it's a thinner piece between the pan and the macarons. Another thing that I've seen people do, and I have not been as successful, or I didn't see, let me phrase it, I didn't see a difference. Turning your pan upside down and bake it on the bottom side. It works and it doesn't. I mean, it works, but I didn't see a difference between me doing it this way and doing it the other way. The only reason I bring that up because I'm always worried, because I'm always running, that thing's gonna slide and fly across my room. Because there's no edge. And you know what, I'm known to do something like that.
Whenever I make silicone mats, I end up, and I've tried it on all different temperatures with different everything. And even if I let it cool, I end up where I go to pick it up and the whole bottom just sticks. Does that make sense?
That means it's not cooked all the way.
Well, I mean, even when they're cooked all the way though, and the whole bottom will just rip out from it. And you could tell it wasn't hollow, but I don't know. Maybe it's just I've had bad luck with it. I guess once you find something that works for you, you stick with it and don't ever go back.
Well, that's the thing too. What brand are you using?
I'm sorry, what?
What brand silicone mat are you using?
Oh, I have no idea. I ordered 2 of them from Amazon that like a year ago or something that somebody recommended. And then I just went back to parchment paper and that's what's been working for me since then.
I found like the cheaper ones, unfortunately, it doesn't work as well.
Okay.
Like some of mine, I need to like replace them actually. Like this one, I'm starting to turn it over just because it's older now. And so I'm finding that I'm having to, it sticks a little more than it was before. Just because I've used it so often and so, so frequently.
Yeah. Two questions.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay.
Go ahead.
Two questions. Do you have a brand name of silicone mat that you like? And 2, what size tip was that?
A 10, I think. Hold on, let me check. It's a big one. And mainly because I can't pipe circles for the life. I can't really pipe. I don't cake decorate or make cookies because I don't have the patience. It is, no, a 12. And then brands, this is my favorite. This is my favorite one. This is what I use a lot. This one, I think.
I'll post it on the website.
Yeah. And then this one, the Simple Baker ones. I found that it worked. But I did have to adjust, like these two, the temps are slightly different. I use this mainly for other things like roll cakes, not so much macarons, because it doesn't have the outline.
Do you ever do it in different sizes or do you do the same size every time? And do you find that like you have to?
I do different sizes, depending on like what it is, yeah. I try not to, just because if I go smaller, what really happens is just me having to fill more.
But does it affect the cooking or anything like that when you do the smaller?
Yes. Yeah, the cook time is going to be shorter. I normally start at 15 minutes and then check from there if it's ready. The way I know it's ready is if I can touch the top and it's not soft or you don't feel like a give. Mm-hmm. That's how I know it's cooked. This is another thing which when I first learned to do this, we never would do it, but I did it with my friend who is a pastry chef. She's like, "What are you doing? Why are you doing this?" I bang the bubbles out, the air bubbles. But man, she was yelling at me. And I apologize about light.
I do that too. And for anybody who does cookies, you can take the scribe that you do to decorate cookies and pop any really big air bubble. Works better than a toothpick because it doesn't have as much drag on it.
So that was one recipe you made. And it made all those cookies. There were no more? No more?
Oh, that's it.
Okay.
You're looking at about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 15, 16 about. I don't count these two because they kind of stuck together.
Yeah. I was going to say, some to sell and the rest to eat.
Yeah. Well, I'm always like, oh God, I don't want to bust out another pan just for 2 of them. So this should dry for at least 15 to 20 minutes, depending. I'm in a drier climate, so it's going to dry a little faster. Sometimes up to 5, depending. And my heat is really low. Mine's at 295 when I'm doing this. But so I have 4 ovens here. This top one I have, I go down to 290. My bottom one, I go up to 300. My one that I use for just macarons, I kid you not, I have 1 oven for just macarons. That's at 295 because that's my most consistent one out of all the ovens. I'll be right back.
I don't know if she could still hear me. Can you still hear me while you're walking away?
Yeah. I could just
when you dry them, how do you know, like, is there a way that you know when they're done drying to the point where you want them to
touch them and it's not tacky?
Okay. Because we're here in San Antonio, and so we get these crazy dry days from the desert. We get a storm that comes through, and suddenly the humidity is like, 10,000.
Yes,
I know.
Yeah. Well, so when I had the ones in Chicago, when I was in Chicago, I could not start baking for a good 30 to 45 minutes for the drying process, just because it took so long just to get to that point.
But basically, when you dry them, what you're looking for, depending on your climate, is to be able to like run your finger over them and not be tacky or sticky or leave any residue, right?
Exactly.
So it's going to vary based on where you live at and
what I used to do. And so I used to dry it in my oven at like 100 degrees. It works. The problem is, to me, if I'm doing so many batches, it's not worth me changing the temp of my oven each and every time, because that means I have to cool it down, open the door, cool it down to the temp of 100, and then I have to crank it up again. It's not worth it.
Well, and the other thing is most of the only go down to about what
175
or whatever it is, because
I go to whatever's the lowest, the lowest speed. I don't like doing that if I don't have to, just because it's not worth it, especially because I'm making macarons. I'm making, like tonight, I'm making 6 dozen. I'm gonna go straight. There's no way am I gonna stop, change it, put it back. I mean, I could in theory because I have multiple ovens, but it's not worth it. I might as well just keep it out. And it's dry here. If you live in a humid climate, that is an option for you, just because it's not. Yeah, trust me. And I wish I knew about that trick when I lived in Chicago, because it took so long to dry, just because it was it was humid all the time.
If you touch it,
I've now made macarons in. Sorry.
Nope. Go ahead. You want me to go?
I was going to say I've now made macarons in 3 different climates.
Yeah.
In Georgia, 4 in Maryland, in Georgia, then in El Paso in the desert, and now here in San Antonio.
Yeah.
So
I'm sure in Georgia it was humid, right? Like
I'm sorry.
In Georgia, didn't take longer to dry, right? Yeah.
Yes. And I kept it like I had a dehumidifier in one of our rooms, so I would put it in the guest room on the like bookshelves and stuff.
Oh yeah, and let it go, right? Yeah. I've done the 100. I've done the the lowest heat that your oven goes, and put it there for like probably around like 5-10 minutes. It worked great again, but depending on how many macarons you have to make, and if you have a spare oven, since I have a spare ones, I could do it that way, but it dries so quickly here. It's not such a big deal.
If you touch it to see if it's or whatnot, then is it ruined or it'll go right back to what it's like. I imagine if you touch it, is it going to make?
Well, sometimes it does get ruined, depending on how dry it is. So I always pick the most funny looking macaron to do that. Like I will pick the one, obvious to me, the one that's stuck together like this. Or I'll pipe like a small one in the corner, you know, just so that's my tester.
Yeah. And obviously you don't want to poke your finger through it, right? You just kind of like brushing the
just
top
kind of
of
like touch a little bit to make sure. Yeah.
Yeah. But if it's not ready, it sticks to your finger and becomes a mess.
I've done it also where you're using a fan. I don't suggest it. Because then your macarons become lopsided.
And have you, when you use a convection oven, the same thing happened to me. So I don't know if you want to touch on that real quick, but anytime convection ovens or anything like that, you can tell them it'll
turn off the fan. It is not worth it. It's not. You know, I used to, I went to the French pastry school in Chicago, and originally I was like, oh yeah, I want convection, right? Because that's what they were using. But then again, they were using such a big, you know, we're making massive amounts of macarons because it was like all the students, you know, shoving it in the same oven, that it worked. To realize when I did it here, I'm like, oh, why are they lopsided? I don't get it. To realize that's what was happening. I also get lopsided ones because my house is tilting. Like my oven is not on a flat surface. So that kind of causes, you know, because I have a standalone oven, and so like, and I'm like, oh man, I forgot this one tilts. So I'll find a slightly
story for anybody who wants to try macarons is don't give up. It takes forever to get it right because they will tilt, they will come out without feet, they will burn, they will spread, they will do whatever, and you just have to keep making them over and over and over again until you figure out what you're looking for.
And
Kristy's like,
also,
oh,
yeah, exactly. And well, you know what it is? It's learning. And keep in mind, you could eat all those. I do it all the time. I use them for parfaits. You know, I'll put like the crumbles on the bottom, put the buttercream or whipped cream, put fruit. You know, they are great.
Just put some plain Nutella, peanut butter in them.
Oh yeah, yeah. And it's funny because my kids like actually eating just the shells anyway, so it's a win-win for me. Oh, speaking of shells too, you could use multiple nuts. You don't have to use almond flour. I always have a slew of cashew, pistachio, hazelnut, peanut, like every type of nut I could find, pretty much I have in my house.
Are there different prices in those? Like, I mean, I'm sure there is.
There is. So like macadamia nuts, those are really dang expensive. I use cashews mainly. So a lot of this is how I started it. A dessert that we have is Saint-Serval, which is a cashew meringue cake. It's pretty much like a découpe. I'm totally pronouncing it wrong. It's a French découpe. It's the hazelnut cake. Almost the exact same. It's just made with cashews, and there's a buttercream instead of chocolate. So I started making those just because I started making meringues because I wanted something not as sweet, because that one you just feel like you just ate a pound of butter. And that's actually how I started making macarons. It was because I was trying to do that. So I subbed the cashews for the almond flour. The only thing is that cashews tend to be a little more expensive. Okay. I found pistachios is about the same amount, like cost-wise. The problem with the other nut flours, they're just hard to find. You could find them in, you know, at the store, but you might as well just order them from Amazon. Right. That's the best route to do it.
So Jen is asking how you store them, how long
do they last? All in the freezer, and they'll last for a good 6 months. At least if you store them well.
That's unfilled or filled?
Oh, for the macarons? Both.
Yeah, both?
Yeah. I do both. Because I always have leftovers somehow. Okay, I'm one of those cautious bakers. Well, I always make extra. Just in case, one, I squish it, because that has happened when I'm putting in packaging. Because sometimes a package